Hang on, why is it not recording there? And we're back. This is segment 3 of the Colombia Calling podcast. I'm Richard McColl in Bogota, Colombia. I do have a 2.5-year-old on my lap, so I apologize in advance. His name is Francis. But my very special guest this week is in Medellin. He's Simon Kutcher, the Senior Project Manager for the World Mosquito Program. Now, I am, this is something that's very close to my heart. So I'm hoping that Simon gets to, explain to us exactly what's going on. So Simon, welcome on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So yes, I'm Simon Kutcher. I'm with the World Mosquito Program, and we have a novel intervention to target the diseases that are transmitted by Aedes aegypti. Those diseases are dengue, Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. And so those diseases cause, they're large diseases, especially dengue, which is responsible for about 400 million cases per year. And most of those are in urban areas. And most people can remember the problems that Zika caused in Brazil in 2016, and chikungunya and yellow fever are a constant threat in many places around the world. So that's the problem. That's the problem that we're tasked with solving, and our solution is something that we think is quite elegant. It's quite neat. It doesn't involve any of the traditional vector control. What we use is a bacteria called Wolbachia, and Wolbachia exists in about 60% of all insects, but it does not exist in the mosquitoes that transmit diseases such as Aedes aegypti for dengue, and in the Anopheles mosquitoes which transmit malaria. And so about 18 years ago, Professor Scott O'Neill, the leader of the World Mosquito Program, he came up with an idea about what if you could put Wolbachia aegypti that have an impact on the transmission of disease. And what actually happened was that it actually blocked the disease, the virus replicating inside the mosquito. And so it didn't allow them, the mosquito could feed on somebody who had the dengue virus inside their system, but the virus wouldn't grow inside the mosquito and then be able to be transferred to somebody else. And so over the last 18 years or so, we've been working on how to get mosquitoes with Wolbachia into environments that are at high risk of these diseases.
This is amazing. I mean, let's just go through the diseases that you've been sort of reducing the cases of. And so we're looking at chikungunya. Let's start with chikungunya and Zika. We don't hear about them so much. Obviously, let's say perhaps the worst days are over. I dare say it, but I guess things are being underreported due to the pandemic as well.
Yeah, so that's correct. I mean, Zika sort of blew through the Americas in 2016, and there's still some low-lying cases of it around, but you don't hear about much in Colombia, and that is basically because we don't test a lot for it in Colombia, and we aren't seeing cases of microcephaly, which is when the babies are born with the very small heads. And so if you aren't seeing that outcome, there's less concern in the public health industry to be looking for Zika. Chikungunya comes and goes about every 5 to 6 years, and when it is in Colombia, it's generally found on the Caribbean coast. And that's generally because of the shipping that comes in from other parts around the world. And so if you hear about chikungunya, you usually hear about it in Santa Marta, Cartagena, and Barranquilla. We definitely don't hear about it in Medellin or in Cali. So yeah, so Colombia is the other thing I should say about Colombia is that out of the 50 million people, only about 30 million people are at risk of mosquito-borne diseases, and that's because the other 20 million live at altitudes too high for the mosquitoes to exist.
And some of the logistics here. You set up the project. I mean, it's all over the. You're in 4 or 5 countries worldwide, right? The project. But why did you choose? Why did you choose Medellin as the seat?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and the reason for that is obviously there are 3 major countries for Aedes aegypti borne diseases in the Americas: Brazil, obviously being the largest, Colombia, and Mexico. And so we wanted to target those countries, and so we had been working with a research organization in Brazil for a number of years, right from the very start of the project.
Yeah.
But in about 2012 or 13, Professor Scott O'Neill, who I mentioned previously, he met with some Colombian researchers at a conference. And the 2 major cities for dengue transmission in the country is Cali is number 1, which is responsible for about 11 to 12% of all dengue transmission every year. And the second is the Ibura Valley, where Medellin sits, and that's at about 8%. And so Medellin is an important city in terms of Aedes aegypti diseases, and we wanted to work with some well-known researchers. And so we worked with a group called PERSET, which is based inside the University of Antioquia, and it's led by Ivan Dario Velez, who's a very well-respected tropical disease researcher in this country.
Okay, I get that. And I mean, I spend a lot of time up on the Caribbean coast, and so I mean, it strikes me as more in obviously up there in the tropics and so on, rainy season, wet season, dry season. Some neighbors, unfortunately, tragically lost their daughter succumbed to dengue and died. I remember it because the walls are low and we could hear them crying and so on. How I want to know really how you're getting this mosquito out there, this mosquito with it's the Wolbachia is what you're saying, the Wolbachia mosquito. How are you getting it out there into these homes and into these areas where obviously these diseases are more prevalent?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because that was the hardest part. And so the initial work, this initial laboratory work that we started about almost 20 years ago, was about how do you take the bacteria and get it into a mosquito where it doesn't naturally exist. And so what they did was they used a technique called micro-injection. And so they took the bacteria and they put it into cell culture of Aedes aegypti, so it would become used to living inside Aedes aegypti cells. And that took a very long time. And then after that, they took that Wolbachia and put it into a very fine needle, and then they injected it into the eggs of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. And that took thousands and thousands and thousands of attempts. And if you see how it's done under a microscope with a robot, and they have to line up all the eggs. The eggs have to be freshly laid so that the shell doesn't become too hard. And then this little needle goes into each one and sprays a bit of Wolbachia inside. And the idea is that at some point, the Wolbachia exists inside those embryos, and then when the mosquitoes are born, they have Wolbachia inside them. So that was a crazy time and a very difficult experiment. And as you can imagine, it probably sent some scientists a little bit mad. But after that, the great thing about Wolbachia is that if the mother has Wolbachia, 100% of her babies will have Wolbachia. Okay, so Wolbachia is transferred from mother to child, regardless of whether she mates with a male that has Wolbachia or not. And so it's a fantastic trait of Wolbachia that allows it to move through a population once it's inside there. So that was the first thing. So we have mosquitoes with Wolbachia. We then backcross those to local Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. And so we take Wolbachia mosquitoes, and we mate them with males from Medellin or males from Cali, and we create a line of mosquitoes that are genetically exactly the same as the wild type mosquito population in that city, but they have Wolbachia inside them. So we have to build a very big insectary, and so in Medellin, we have an insectary that you would have seen in that video is capable of producing 30 million mosquito eggs a week. And in there, we produce the mosquitoes that we then release into the wild, okay? So, and that's a very difficult process. No one in their right mind has ever produced that numbers of mosquitoes. You know, for the last 70, 80 years, we've spent our lives trying to kill mosquitoes, not to grow them. And so it's not a skill that many people in the world had. There are lots of people that have skills in rearing insects, sterile control of agricultural pests, but not in the mosquito world. So we have to grow the mosquitoes, and then after that, you have to get them into the environment. And so there's a number of ways that we do that. The first or easiest way is to release adult mosquitoes. And so we grow the mosquitoes into adults, and we put them into a tube, not dissimilar to this drink bottle. And you put about 100 mosquitoes in the drink bottle. You take it to a point on the road, and you just open it up and let the mosquitoes fly away. And we generally do that about every 50 meters, every 100 meters down a road, and you release about 100 mosquitoes, 150 mosquitoes at every point. And you just keep doing that for 15 to 20 weeks. And then over time, the Wolbachia mosquitoes replace the wild type mosquitoes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm thinking of the intricacy of the science that has to be involved, of the injecting. I get this idea from, I guess it was a film from the 1980s, kind of, was it called Inner Space? Yeah, when they injected the miniature man in a submarine. Yeah, this is what I'm starting to get images of this back from the day. But wow. And also, yes, scientists might well have gone mad, but that comes with the territory of working in this kind of field, I think. But so you're injecting these things, you're inserting.
So we only had to do that once. Okay. Let me be clear with that.
Okay.
We only did that once. And once we have mosquitoes with Wolbachia, we can then ship the eggs of those mosquitoes anywhere in the world, and then back cross those to the local mosquitoes to create the local Wolbachia line. So the guy who went insane injecting the eggs, he no longer has to do that, and he can enjoy his days in the nut house where he probably still is.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. Still amazing. I mean, still totally amazing. And I love that you held up that bottle. It's like an empty Gatorade bottle. It's just these bottles that you're leaving every 50, 100 meters down the road. But okay. And so then I guess you've got to have the wherewithal and the support of the local communities as well to say, we're going to release mosquitoes back into your area, things that you've been trying to erase and eradicate, and are the purveyors of disease and potential death, but we're going to release good ones. I mean, how do they respond to that?
Yeah, so I've been with the program about 15 years, and I used to work on the Southeast Asian projects, and specifically in Vietnam. And so when we did the first releases in Vietnam in about 2014, I think it was, we were petrified. We were like, how are we going to do this? All they've ever been told is mosquitoes are bad. You don't want them in your house. You don't want breeding sites around your house. All the government ever told them was clean up breeding sites, don't let them breed, blah, blah, blah. And so it was very difficult to say, okay, we have this new idea, this new approach, and we're going to put mosquitoes into your house. And they were like, you've got to be kidding me. But it was amazing how, if you engage the community, especially authentically, they respond. And I think the biggest thing that I've noticed over the last eight years of releasing mosquitoes in both Asia and in the Americas is that when you're not asking for behavior change, most public health messaging is around behavior change. wash your hands before you cook, make sure that there's no breeding sites, vaccinate your children, all of these things. It requires the humans to change what they currently do. When we went to the communities, we said, we have this thing, this is our plan, this is what we're going to do, and it requires no input from you other than to just normally go about your life. You'll still be bitten by mosquitoes, but they'll be good mosquitoes. And they accepted it, and like overwhelmingly accepted it. So when people understand the project, understand how it works, we've had 90 to 95% community acceptance everywhere that we've worked globally. And so that's a great thing to know, is that when people understand it, they're very happy. But we also set up systems about the way that we engage the community. We spend a lot of trying to not acceptance of what we're doing, but to have them involved in the program. And so schools love for us to be involved. We can create like a little cup, and we put mosquito eggs inside a capsule that looks like a pill that you swallow, and you put that into the cup, you fill it up with water, and then after the eggs will hatch relatively straight away, and about a week later the mosquitoes will start to come out. And so there's all these great community programs that we do. You find the community champions to help with spreading the word. Spreading the chismus, as we know, is quite a big thing. So we get in there, and then But the other thing that's important for us is that we have like a issues where we get some feedback from the. That's around people saying, I'm getting bitten too much. My kids are being bitten too much. And so we have methods to deal with that. We obviously explain what the program's about, what's happening. We talk to them, talk to their neighbours, talk to the community. We can stop releasing in that area. We can release, we can reduce the amount of mosquitoes that we release in that area. And so and as I said at the start, it's responding authentically to these queries and these issues. And once people understand it, they're like, this is great, because it's not just about the individual. It gives them a sense of community, which is an important thing,
Amazing and incredible that you could be able to do this. And of course, I can understand why the communities take it on board. Of course, the benefits notwithstanding, but as you say, you're not changing a lifestyle, you're not changing practice and so on, and so therefore you're not telling people that they need to do something else, because as you suggest, that's what creates friction if you're interfering in a life, I think, and so on. So
that's right.
And we've discussed, dengue is rife. Dengue, especially in this part of the world, in Colombia, I've only had it once, but it was hemorrhagic, and I had it at the same time as malaria, the same year as I had dengue, normal dengue, with the first case of malaria. This was in Brazil, in Bahia. I almost didn't live to see 30 years of age. I'm now turning, I'll be 46 by the time this comes out. So therefore, success story somehow is that I escaped this. But when I was in hospital in Medellin, up on the hill, the doctor said to me, because it was just about to give me a full blood transfusion, just about, but my platelets stayed above the minimum level, she said, listen, you may be the unluckiest man alive, but you're alive. and it stuck with me forever. Dr. Ana Maria Gomez, if any day you listen to this, thank you again. But this is it. Dengue, how do we... It's going to sound like a trite question, but can you explain how you sort of measure success in this project against something as rife as dengue?
Yeah, so we have how we measure impact. The easiest way is to measure the dengue cases historically, and then you release Wolbachia, and then you measure what happens with dengue after that. And so that's what we've been doing in the Abura Valley. We've released Wolbachia in the city of Bejo, and then Medellin and Itagüí. And so those three cities are actually one large urban area. And so they actually make up about 3.5 million people. And so historically, dengue in the valley comes about every 6 or 7 years, and the last big outbreak was 2016, sorry, and then the next big outbreak was supposed to be of June of this year. And of course, we haven't seen any dengue to date. And so you need time for that to happen. You need to sort of wait for when the dengue peaks and troughs come to be able to see if there's a difference. And so far, I can say that the dengue transmission in Medellin, Bejo, and Itagüí is at historical lows for about the last 2 and a bit years. And so it's a little bit early for us to say that is completely because of Wolbachia, but we know that Wolbachia has quite an influence in that space. We also undertook a better program to measure impact, and what we did was we had 3 areas in Medellin that received Wolbachia, and we had 3 areas that did not receive Wolbachia, and they were the comunas that have historically the highest amount of dengue transmission inside them. And the idea was that we would actively look for dengue cases. And so we worked with the clinics in those areas, and we said, if anyone turns up that looks like they have dengue, send them to us. We'll take a blood sample and we'll check and see. And so we undertook that over a 4-year period. But unfortunately, it didn't work that well because there's no dengue transmission in the rest of the valley. So there's no dengue transmission in those areas. And so we needed to get about 100 dengue cases, and we only found about 25. So, but again, that's a little bit more evidence that it's working. But our best evidence was in the city of Yogyakarta in Indonesia, where we took a city that didn't have any Wolbachia in it, and we split the city up into places that received Wolbachia, places that didn't receive Wolbachia, and that was what we would call a gold standard trial, and it showed that dengue transmission reduced by about 80% in the areas that had Wolbachia, and so 80% is pretty good. It's better than any of the vaccines that are on the market for dengue at the moment. And it's obviously a safer and it's safe for humans. It doesn't affect the environment, and it's sustainable. Wolbachia mosquitoes will last for forever. And so that's our evidence, and the evidence is growing more and more all the time.
And so those pockets that get Wolbachia and the ones that don't, the ones that don't in Jakarta, for example, that's the control, isn't it? I mean, that's what you're saying. So you've got the control. I remember that from my science classes back in the day. Yeah. I was not a scientist, but I remember that. So now, the reason I didn't know anything about this project, and the reason it came to mind is that I saw, I guess I don't know where it was published, but it was a letter or an article written by Bill Gates very recently, and he was saying, and it was addressed about malaria. And now, is this moving towards not an eradication, but a reduction in malarial cases as well? Is this what you're aiming for?
So the World Mosquito Program does not work in the malaria field. We have enough on our plate with what we're doing. But there are research groups out there who are trying to get Wolbachia into the malaria mosquitoes, and so far not with any great success. And so I think that's why people are giving up in that it hasn't been a simple process. Like it wasn't a simple process to get Wolbachia into Aedes aegypti, but it was obviously achievable in 4 or 5 years. That hasn't been the case for the Anopheles mosquitoes, where they've been working on this for 20 years and they just can't make it work. So Wolbachia probably won't be a solution for malaria, unfortunately.
And why can't it work? I mean, to the layperson like myself, a mosquito is a mosquito. I mean, what is the technicality there? Do we know?
I don't know personally. I mean, it's about getting the bacteria, the Wolbachia, to adapt to that environment, and so what they do is they've been leaving Wolbachia in cell culture of these different mosquito species for years and years and years in the hope that they adapt so that you can inject them in the same as we did for Aedes aegypti. And there's different subspecies of Wolbachia that they've been trying to do that with, not just with the one that we use. But yeah, it just doesn't work for some reason.
I mean, it's so very disappointing. But of course, you've come so far with the others. You know, Zika, chikungunya, dengue. You come so far, and yellow fever, of course. Yeah, yellow fever is one of the big ones you guys are reducing as well.
Yeah, so, so Wolbachia blocks that as well in the Aedes aegypti mosquito. So it's pretty fantastic in the sense that at the moment any virus that is transmitted through Aedes aegypti, Wolbachia will block. There's also a virus coming out of Brazil called Mayaro, Mayaro, and it blocks that as well. So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty amazing.
So I have to ask, I don't know anything about this Mayaro. Tell me about that. I mean, why does Brazil seem to be sort of ground zero for these things?
Oh, I think Brazil is obviously it's a very big city, and I think that big country, and the reason for that is that it's completely tropical. It doesn't have the altitude places like Bogota or Quito or Mexico City, and so it's all tropical, and so tropical diseases there flourish, So Mayaro is a similar to dengue and to chikungunya. I mean the symptoms are similar, and so yeah, it doesn't have the crippling effects of dengue though. It's not as likely to kill you as say one of the dengue serotypes are.
Okay, and it doesn't create the encephalitis in the newborns or and so on. Okay, thank. But then obviously the photos were horrifying of what these poor families and poor children. Of course, that drew attention to what was going on. But if we got a new one that's Majura coming through and it's not as deadly, then it just won't get the news. I mean, that's the truth of it, unfortunately. But I digress.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's one of our issues is that dengue is still considered a neglected tropical disease compared to malaria, and that's basically because of the death rates, as opposed to the case rates. 400 million cases of dengue per year, and governments don't put any money into it, or hardly any money into it, except probably the Brazilians.
And no, I don't know if I'm correct on this, but back 15 odd years ago in Colombia, I recall, and so I haven't updated my knowledge on this, but I have again, like I said, I spent a lot of time on the Caribbean coast and so on. Now, once there were, the government would release the money for fumigations in small towns, maybe in barrios and everything else, once 2 cases of dengue had been reported. And it always seemed to me as a bit of a, okay, well, you've missed the opportunity here. If you're doing, you're going to fumigate after it's already started and people are already, it always seemed to me a bit odd, but then that's bureaucracy and then that's several other things. Is that still the case now? Do you know, is that if a small town reports 2 cases of dengue, okay, yeah, now the government will go and fumigate?
Yeah, so it depends on the municipality. It depends on the resources that they have. But yeah, that's generally what happens in a dengue outbreak is that you have 4 people, 5 people live in the same house on average. There's about 5 people per residence. And because the Aedes aegypti mosquito is a very domestic mosquito, a very urban mosquito, it wants to live inside. Okay, and so it does live in the forest like other mosquito species. It lives in houses because the females prefer to feed on human blood, not on dog blood or pig blood or horse blood. And so if they're in the house, they tend to take multiple people who live inside the house. So the mosquitoes, the virus inside it, and it bites the 4 or 5 people who live in that house. It's generally will happen that the 4 or 5 people will probably pick up dengue. And so what the municipalities want to do, the vector control people, is they want to find those cases initially and go to those houses, spray them with insecticide to try and kill that mosquito and other mosquitoes from feeding on those people when the virus is active inside them. So yeah, that's still the policy. The problem, of course, is that the mosquitoes are very resistant to insecticides, and so they might not kill them all. And I think that's similar to cockroaches. Mosquitoes are incredibly insects, and they're incredibly difficult to kill. They seem to find a way to survive regardless, you know. So I think that's again one of the reasons that we think what we do is very elegant, is that it doesn't require to try and battle wits with an insect that's very hard to kill. You just change them internally and then just let them live in the environment.
It's the perfect vector, isn't it? The mosquito. So, I mean, you know, we've talked all about this a bit and so on. I think it's a fascinating, I mean, a truly fascinating, project, this, of course. I mean, and it's owned by Monash University in Australia. And there's funding that originally came from the Gates Foundation. I mean, so there's as serious people behind this. And I mean, have you ever had dengue? I should ask.
No, it's amazing. You know, I've works for almost 30 years and I've never had it, but a lot of close people around me have had it. Almost everybody, you know, has had it, and yeah. So I've just, you know, knock on wood to this day.
Yeah, I can tell you though, it is so unpleasant. It is so unpleasant. You know that you get the fever that first day or the second day, and then it goes away. And you think, oh, it was just a little fever. And then when it comes back with that added fury and aggression, and it really does feel like your bones are crushing. I mean, it's just, I honestly, the world is ending. You're in that situation. So I mean, okay, so I got 12 countries that you're based in. You're in Medellin, Bello, Itagüí, Sabaneta, Cali. Where are you going to expand to in Colombia? Please tell me you're going to the Caribbean coast, or you're already there.
We definitely want to. So at the moment we're working in Cali, and we've done about a third of the city, and we've got money to do about another third, and we're looking for money to complete Cali, as Cali is the most endemic city within the country. We're also trying very hard, and we're negotiations are moving forward to find money to do the Caribbean coast. Metropolitan area with about 6 or 7 municipalities, about 2.2 million people, and then the port city of Cartagena. So they're our targets, and we're actually expecting that those to be funded through local money rather than through international money. So our big move in Colombia is to get Wolbachia to become vector control policy, which then means that money from the government can be spent towards it. So at the moment, we're just classified as a research program within the country.
I would say you're greater than that, but again, it's just the classification, almost politically, isn't it? I think it's mind-blowing to think of the science that has gone in and the minds that have been employed into this. I mean, my hat goes off to you. This is one of those good news episodes here on the Colombia Calling podcast. Not often that we, unfortunately, we end up reporting on quite a lot of negative stuff, but I try and mix it up a little bit. And I like this. I mean, this again, having suffered from, what have I had? I've had dengue twice, so hemorrhaging. Malaria I've had typhoid, but that's not mosquito. What else? I can't remember what else, but diphtheria, I think. And almost anything tropical aside from, thankfully, I've not had Zika or yellow fever or chikungunya. Well, I've had COVID, I suppose I can say that too. But it's not top trumps, is it? It's not top trumps about who's got what and so on. But it's so it's so reassuring to know that these things are going on. It's so reassuring to know that there are these science these laboratories doing these things, and you know, I'm a pretty up to speed person with most things, and not to know that it's happening in the city of Medellin is, it was quite shocking to me. So I think it's excellent, and let me say, thank you for your time. It seems painfully underreported. Let's get the message, albeit on my tiny corner of the internet and of the podcast world. Maybe one person who's philanthropic out there is listening and he wants to fund the next third of Cali, you know, so hopefully. But thank you, Simon Kutcher, for your time. I mean, it's really been quite enlightening.
Not a problem. It's been enjoyable. Thank you so much, Richard.
You're welcome. I apologize for the noise, children, dogs, everything has been, it's just one of those days when you have a family. I don't know what's going on, but this has been really interesting. Check out the World Mosquito Program online. They've got sort of, you know, blog posts and updates from the field. Simon Kutcher is the senior project manager here in Colombia. He's been, you know, I mean, you've been in the implementation of international development for 25 years. You know what you're doing. That's what it says on the website anyway. You know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. It really is quite groundbreaking, in my opinion. So thank you again to the World Mosquito Program and Senior Project Manager Simon Kutcher for their time. We will be back next week, of course, with further stories from Colombia. I really like this one, though. I really like this one about the mosquitoes having suffered from mosquito-borne diseases myself. I guess that's really it for us this week. We'll go over to some messages from our sponsors, and of course, please share the word, share the podcast, go onto our Patreon site, and you know, to read up on what's going on. So, thank you again, everyone, for listening, and of course, keep subscribing.